Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we're going to discuss about fertilizers. I get a lot of questions regarding this. What fertilizers should you use? When should you use bloom boosters and growth boosters and so on? So in this video I'll talk about what I discovered with my orchids. I'll tell you what I'm currently using, and for those of you who already know, I'll make an update, talk a little bit on how to choose a proper fertilizer for orchids, and basically all my ideas on the subject. So let's go. So the first idea, a fertilizer is not something that a company came up with and tells us we need to use it in order for our plants to do okay. It is actually plant food, and all of our orchids and plants in general need it. We'll talk about the difference between synthetic fertilizers and organic fertilizers a little bit later, but the first thing you need to know is that fertilizers are absolutely needed. Now, using fertilizers will definitely show results. With orchids, they will show in a year or two, and that might throw you off. You might think, oh, my orchid is doing very well without fertilizer, but I promise you this will not be the case in a few years. I have a video in which I compare a plant that was fertilized with one that was not fertilized. It was a little experiment. You can check the info card right here or the description below if you missed it and would like to see it. In nature, plants do get fertilized, naturally of course, but this comes from the composition of many organic things that we find in nature and we cannot find in our home, such as animal and bird excrement, dead leaves and debris. All of those things decomposed, and the end result is actually plant food, the exact same substances that we find in fertilizers. So if you're ever wondering, is fertilizer something that I need, or is it just something pushed by a company? It is something you need. Don't have any doubt about that. Now, the next question I want to address is, should I use an orchid destined fertilizer, or any type of fertilizer will do? Now, this is a tricky one. Each fertilizer contains pretty much the same substances if you break it down, plus minus a few of them. What's different is the ratio in between those substances. And orchids just happen to be so different than any other plants simply because the vast majority of them are epiphytic or lithophytic. They do not grow in very rich, nutrient-rich soil actually, and that makes them quite a lot more sensitive than other plants. So if you would ask me, should I buy any type of fertilizer for any type of plant, or should I buy an orchid destined fertilizer, I would go with orchid destined fertilizer because the ratios are in many cases safer than an all-purpose fertilizer. The label will specify how much you should fertilize, and even though you can tweak this when you have your own opinion on how to fertilize orchids, overall it will be safer for you to use that fertilizer in comparison to an all-purpose fertilizer. So let's take a look at what my fertilizer contains. You can see we have nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, and some other micronutrients. All fertilizers pretty much contain these things, at least these three, which is NPK. Now here's the catch, some orchid fertilizers will lack micronutrients, which are these things. You can see the quantity of them is quite a lot lower than the quantity of the macronutrients. It doesn't mean orchids don't benefit and don't need them. So the first advice that I can give you is to look for micronutrients on the label of the fertilizer you are thinking of purchasing. Cheaper, maybe more commercial fertilizers will pretty much lack some micronutrients, and you can do okay with them until you find a better fertilizer or until you will actually observe deficiencies. But if you have the choice, go for a fertilizer that has micronutrients, which is NPK, and micronutrients as well, which are all of these other ones like iron, manganese, zinc, copper, all of those things. Now, some fertilizers will lack calcium. This can be a good thing and a bad thing. If you're using tap water, your tap water already contains calcium and even magnesium. So if you have a fertilizer that lacks, sadly, calcium or magnesium, or it has them in small dosages, it can still work. Depends what the water is that you're using. If you're using rainwater, distilled water, or osmosis water, you do need a fertilizer that contains calcium and magnesium, or you can dose them separately. That's a more elaborate discussion, but the bottom line is, if you have the option, go for a fertilizer that contains micronutrients, macronutrients, and depending on the water you use, look at the calcium and magnesium contents as well. As a side note, I am using osmosis water, very, very low in calcium and magnesium salts, so I need to dose them. This is why I chose this fertilizer. Now, the second thing I would recommend you look on a fertilizer label is the nitrogen source. So let's take a look on mine. We have nitrate nitrogen, 12.5% out of 13, and ammoniacal nitrogen 0.7. There is nothing specified about urea. Now, urea is a widely available organic compound. Even though you're purchasing a synthetic fertilizer, if it has urea, that urea is organic. Being that it's organic, it needs to go through decomposition. But like I told you earlier, in our orchid pots, which are very sterile if you compare them to how they would grow in nature, we are lacking those bacteria responsible for breaking down urea. So I would advise you to go for a fertilizer that does not contain urea. Look for nitrate, but also ammonia nitrogen. I'm saying that because I recently found a sort of an article, I'll link you down below to it. It's more of a Q&A from a website that I actually like and respect for what they've done so far. And they're saying that ammonia can be absorbed by orchids as well, but the best is nitrate. You will also see that they recommend urea-free fertilizers due to the same reasons that I told you. I'll give you that opinions are kind of split on this matter, but my personal belief is that in our orchid pots we cannot even nearly try to copy the normal processes that would happen in nature, and decomposition and all of the stages of nitrogen cycle are not present. So this is how the package of my fertilizer looks like. If you see, there's nothing mentioned about growth stimulant or bloom stimulant or booster or anything of the sorts. And I have to tell you, I reached the conclusion that bloom boosters are simply not needed. I did use them in the past, and I have to say I really don't see any difference in how my orchids are blooming. Moreover, I think that if you keep an orchid well fed, well cared for, it will bloom no matter what. You don't need to boost it with boosters. Also, the flower count will not necessarily be improved with the bloom boosters. What counts the most is the health of the orchid and its environment. If everything in its environment, temperature, humidity, and all of that are in the required ratios. So when it comes to bloom boosters and growth boosters, I would say don't hassle with that. If you want a simple version, a balanced fertilizer can be very good for you. And by balanced, I mean numbers that are pretty similar. Mine is not a balanced fertilizer, but a balanced one will be 13, 13, 13 or 10, 10, 10. You get the idea. These three numbers should be pretty similar between them. If you will, mine can be considered a growth booster. But what do we do with the third number? Because it's really high, and usually bloom boosters have a very low first number, the other two are high, and a growth booster is vice versa. So in this case, you might say that mine is both a growth fertilizer, but also a bloom fertilizer. So this is why I'm saying it doesn't really matter. You can go for one that is balanced, or you can go for one like mine, which I will talk a little bit more towards the end of this video. So the fertilizer that I use is the MSU formula. It is the one that I think is good for orchids. I like the ratios, so everything goes according to my opinion in the articles that I read and the studies and so on. But people have different opinions, and you will find different types of fertilizers with different numbers and so on. But pretty much try to remember these three things that I told you. First, you need a orchid destined fertilizer because it is simply safe. When you will be more experienced with orchids, you can actually go for other fertilizers. I actually know people who use tomato fertilizers. But that fertilizer is not safe, especially if you don't know what you're doing just yet, so give it some time. Then second, go for a fertilizer that has micro elements as well in addition to the macro elements. And the third thing, try to go for a fertilizer that does not contain urea. Go for nitrate based, and if it has a little ammonia, that's okay. According to the article, they might be able to actually absorb ammonia as well as it is. Now, when it comes to liquid fertilizers or powder fertilizers, well, this has to be your option. Overall, there might be a chance that salt fertilizers will be a little bit more harsh than liquid fertilizers, but if you think about things logically, it shouldn't be the case because you are diluting this in water. You're not pouring it over the top of the pot. You're actually diluting it first in fertilizer and then dosing it to your orchid. Whereas a liquid fertilizer comes from salts directly diluted, prepared for you, so you can dilute that very concentrated liquid into water. Overall, it should be the same thing. I cannot say if this is harsher than the liquid one. I had some bad experiences with a fertilizer, but it didn't really have to do anything with the salts itself. So this will depend on you. If you want to go for a liquid fertilizer, go ahead. If you want a powder fertilizer, go ahead. But I can tell you that a powder fertilizer is quite a lot more economical. If you don't have a lot of orchids, maybe this is not an important issue for you, but for me it really is. So the bigger your collection is, you might want to look into powder fertilizers that you will need to pre-mix in water before using them. And to wrap up this subject, I used quite a lot of different fertilizers until now, and I can tell you that some are better than others. For example, I used the Orchid Focus fertilizer about 2 years ago. I used it for an entire year, and I think it was too weak actually. In full summer, when orchids are growing very fast, I had deficiencies, which I eventually corrected with a higher nitrogen fertilizer, some addition of magnesium, and everything is okay. Ever since then, I didn't really have any deficiencies. So I can tell you that some fertilizers are kind of weak. That's the only one that I found. But most of them should have a pretty good ratio. And as you can see, my ratio here is 13:3:15. This is a pretty good ratio, economical as well. It's a good ratio in comparison to the micro elements as well, but that can vary. So except for the Orchid Focus, which had something like 1 or 0.5 or 1.5%, all the other fertilizers that I used are much richer than that one. So when it comes to this, I would recommend that you don't really go for fertilizers that have 1, 0.5, 1. They're kind of weak. They might not be economical, and the ratios in regards to the micronutrients might be totally off. I would never return to that fertilizer. I just believe in time it will not be enough, particularly in warm seasons. But luckily, most fertilizers do have pretty high numbers here. Now, how often you should fertilize? This is a very delicate subject, so pretty much if you're a beginner, just follow the instructions. Don't go over the dosages. If you're not sure, fertilize a little less than what they recommend. Sometimes they do recommend a little bit too much, but they will never recommend something that will kill your orchid after one watering. So don't go over the recommended dosages, but in time you will kind of figure out a schedule for your own. We all have different opinions and ideas. Some people fertilize lightly at every watering. Some people fertilize a little bit more every 3 waterings. So this is a totally different subject. And in some cases, it truly depends on environment, setup, orchids, and so on. Okay, now going back to an update on my fertilizer situation, for those of you who are already aware of the problems that I had, I'm still using the MSU. I am happy with it. I do not see any root burn issues. You can see I actually used it quite a lot. I'm fertilizing all of my orchids with it just to see how everybody reacts to it. And I have to say everything is going a lot better. I do not have so much root burn. So with the MSU, I am still fertilizing, although temperatures are kind of low right now. Let me show you how low. 17 degrees low. So in these temperatures, I do tend to fertilize a lot less than I did in the summertime. And of course for the continuous growers, but I still do use it every 2 to 3 weeks or whenever I feel like it. So no trouble so far, I still use it. Now returning to the fertilizer that gave me problems in the past. And let's talk a little bit about rain mix, because it appears we have some news. Now Orchid Dude here on YouTube shared with me a picture with a conversation between 2 people. It would appear that rain mix now is not pink. It is actually a white powder, and when mixed in water it doesn't go pink anymore, it's white. And the answer the person received when addressing this change was that the company actually improved the fertilizer in a way that they reduced the quantity of those red flakes, or they actually removed it altogether. I am not sure. But it would appear that rain mix now is a white powder. It is not pink anymore, and it potentially dissolves completely in water. Now, I don't know when this change was made. It might have been made before I actually had issues with this fertilizer, and I just got an older batch. I cannot be sure, but in the case that they actually changed their formulation because of that whole adventure you might already know about, I can only say that, well, I'm happy. If that fertilizer is now suitable for home growing, we have another alternative to the MSU, which in my opinion is a really good fertilizer, you guys. So just to let you guys know, rain mix is not pink anymore and possibly does not burn roots anymore, which is good news for us. And I'm thinking of letting aside my personal issues with that whole situation and buy a new batch, give it a go, and tell you guys if that version of the fertilizer burns the roots of my orchids as well or not. If it turns out it doesn't, and if it turns out that it's a better formula, I'm happy. I'm not happy about the outcome of my orchids, but overall, if it led to the improvement of that fertilizer, I'm truly happy. If that fertilizer is now safe and it's appropriate for home growing in less than ideal conditions, it means we have another option to the MSU, especially in Europe, because MSU is not available in Europe, sadly. It is only available in the USA. But I don't know, I might go ahead and purchase another rain mix, give it a go. I don't know, would you guys like to see an experiment on that? Let me know down below in the comment section. Okay, that's about it on the synthetic fertilizers. Let us talk about organic fertilizers, which is something that many people still ask me. And if you go on the internet, you will find people that use all sorts of things to fertilize their plants and their orchids. And I have to tell you, honestly, nobody actually uses a complete spectrum of nutrients they should be using. So for example, I saw a video some time ago. This girl was using rice water and crushed eggshells for her orchids. While that is fine, and I cannot disagree that those things contain substances that orchids like and feed upon, it's not the whole menu. And sadly, all plants kind of need the whole menu for a proper development and proper growth. So when it comes to homemade fertilizers and organic fertilizers, you need to know exactly what that fertilizer contains. For example, kelp and seaweed, all good stuff. But you have to be aware that it does not contain all the menu and all the spectrum of substances that orchids need. And if you dig a little bit further, the experienced growers actually recommend using those things in combination with a synthetic fertilizer. So with this, I'm not saying that organic fertilizers should not be used, but you need to keep in mind a few things. One, exactly what your fertilizer contains, and sadly, manufacturers of these fertilizers don't really specify what their fertilizer contains, but if you dig a little bit on the internet, you'll find out. Second, you need to be aware of the bio buildup. As I was saying in our orchid pots, the composition processes are not complete. They do happen, but they stop at some point because some particular bacteria and microorganisms simply cannot live in the conditions of our orchid growing, particularly in a house. I'm not talking about keeping orchids in a garden and so on, just the house growing part of things. So when it comes to full organic fertilizers, I simply believe that I have a very big grocery shopping list that I do not want to go through, because think about it. If I want to dose nitrogen, I'll go for fish emulsion. Alrighty, check. If I want to go for calcium, I will use eggshells. Check. If I want to dose, potassium, phosphorus, I'll use banana peels, okay? Check. But what happens to all those micronutrients? I first have to figure out the item that can dose that to me, then put it in my shopping list and make a mix of everything. And also, mind you, as I was saying, you might have some issues with organic buildup, particularly nitrogen, because in organic fertilizers, I'm not sure what type of nitrogen you'll be getting. I'm not sure it's going to be nitrate. Nitrate is the end result after decomposition and nitrogen cycle. You might actually be getting urea, which is not ideal in my opinion, and apparently in some other people's opinions that I support. So those are the things you need to keep in mind with organic fertilizers. Go ahead and experiment if you want to experiment, and I don't know, maybe you will come up with the perfect formula. I just think it's a little bit harder. If you are a beginner and you're not sure exactly what to do, stick with the synthetic fertilizer, and then try to research this area of fertilizing. See if it's for you, see if you can come up with the proper menu, let's call it like that. If you don't want to hassle with it, synthetic fertilizers are pretty okay. And you might have heard those companies that make organic fertilizers say harsh and useless chemicals, blah blah. No. All of them are chemicals, you guys. Even the nitrogen you find in nature. It is a chemical compound. When you reduce them to the molecule level, they're pretty similar. One atom of nitrogen cannot be different from another atom of nitrogen, no matter where it comes from. But also try to not fall in the trap of the companies who are selling organic nutrients. It just gives you the end result of the composition and all of those natural processes. And it will be your decision if you want to use the synthetic fertilizer or the organic fertilizer. And I am in no way and measure to judge, but just try to be balanced. in what you hear and what you read. Think for yourselves and see exactly what your fertilizer contains. So alrighty guys, let's wrap up this discussion. I think it's enough. If I missed anything, do let me know in the comments below. In a question, I do check my comments and I try to reply to as many of you as possible. Hope this was useful and or enjoyable. And if you've liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you disliked it, give it a thumbs down. Subscribe to my channel for daily orchid and plants videos, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye! I have a confession. I bought some Phalaenopsis, but in my defense, this one is quite special. You'll just have to wait for tomorrow's video to find out. But oh my god, what's happening to me? I'm buying Phalaenopsis. I've changed.